Come explore the worlds of National Geographic video. This program is made possible by a grant from the people of Chevron. We're proud to bring new worlds to your world.
In the interior of Borneo, a wild creature has long eluded human understanding. To the people of the jungle, he was not an animal, but a kind of primitive human being. Orangutan, the man of the forest. Now, a young anthropologist, Biruté Galdikas Brindamour, hopes to penetrate the secrets of the orangutan's natural existence. He has been captured and caged, but his life in the wild remains a mystery. Biruté Galdikas Brindamour is part of an intensive worldwide effort to understand man's closest living relatives, the great apes. Six 6,000 miles away in equatorial Africa, Dian Fossey has lived for nearly a decade, alone among the mountain gorillas. Young orphan gorillas, adopted of necessity, give her some insight into the animal's behavior. But they are not the real subjects of her study. Dian Fossey came here for one reason. Here in Africa's Virunga Mountains is one of the last strongholds of the mountain gorilla, the largest and most feared of all the world's great apes. 'In the lush, overgrown jungles of Indonesian Borneo, winding waterways offer the only passage into the interior. Inland from the Java Sea, a small ironwood dugout heads northward along the Sikunir Kanen River with a unique passenger, a helpless baby orangutan named Majid. Comforting him is anthropologist Biruté Galdikas Brindamour. She came to this jungle to study the wild orang, accompanied by her husband Rod, project coordinator and photographer. As an Indonesian boatman watches for sunken logs in marshy shallows, they leave the last signs of human life and push into the interior. The young orangutan, rescued from captivity by the Indonesian government, will be returned to the wild, if he can learn to readjust. For more than 30 miles, they travel along the narrowing waterway toward their outpost camp. Their destination lies deep within the Tanjung Puting rainforest of southern Borneo, a wilderness once known to only a handful of native Indonesians. Biruté first stepped ashore here in November of 1971, backed by organizations such as the Leakey Foundation and the National Geographic Society. Here Biruté began a dual mission, to study the wild orangutan and to rehabilitate young captive orangs like Majid.
Majid was the 12th orangutan to join our camp. All were orphans. Their mothers were killed so that the youngsters could be taken and sold as pets, some worth as much as $5,000 on the black market. They had never known life in the wild. It was my hope that we could prepare them to survive on their own in the jungle. But too often, the simple luxuries of our camp held a greater lure for the young orangutans.
Majid's rehabilitation begins simply. For the first time, he is introduced to the forest. On the edge of camp, he is free to follow his natural instincts. Only 12 months old, Majid not only lacks experience and strength, but that elusive gift called balance. Until he is about a year and a half, the young orangutan will need reassurance and protection. Like most primates, Majid clings instinctively to the one being he identifies as mother. In 1971, Rod Brindamour gave up his studies in physics to come here and assist his wife. It was Biruté who introduced Rod to his first orangutan in an American zoo.
Get a pencil and notebook.
Now, Rod, like Biruté, is totally devoted to the orangutans and is equally concerned with their welfare. By checking the orang's weight periodically, they gain insight into how infants grow and develop.
Is that through? Majid.
Off you go.
Rio. Here. Handle Majid for me.
They are weighed, still looking to their foster mother for protection. Later, her weight will be subtracted.
80. Oh, that's why.
Because
He's holding onto the counterbalance.
Is it ridiculous?
Okay, 86.8. Is he on a full stomach or empty stomach?
Working with the rehabilitants, Rod and Biruté are well aware of a basic problem. The orangs become too easily attached to human beings and to the easy life in camp. Sugito knows that camp is where the food is, so there are times when he has no desire at all to go into the forest, the orangutan's natural home. One more problem in rehabilitation is the orang's growing attachment to each other. If this forest had been all these orangs had ever known, they would be solitary, independent, unsocial animals. Yet these rehabilitants seem to have a powerful social need, a camaraderie, a reluctance to be alone. In time, the rehabilitants begin to feel at home in the forest. Still, they are seldom far apart. As they sample the forest's food, they cluster together. The youngest still clings to his foster mother. The hardest thing they will learn is that for their species, life is solitary. Their favorite foods are thinly spread throughout the forest. Group feeding is impossible.
Washing your face, Riola?
The young rehabilitants learn some things by imitation. But their way of life, alone in the forest, will depend ultimately on their ability to adapt. This is their world by nature. It is Biruté's world by choice.
I like being alone in the forest. Whenever I'm in the forest, I always have the sensation of being in a place that is slightly magical. The sounds change, the feeling of the air changes. The whole quality of the world changes when you're in the forest.
When darkness makes work in the forest impossible, research goes on in camp. Regularly, blood samples are taken of all the rehabilitants.
No, but I don't look at it.
You're gonna get poked. See, when you come to this summer camp, the first thing that happens to you is you get poked.
This simple blood test is a precaution against the same diseases that afflict man, from the common cold to malaria.
Leo does here. Yeah, we got a good job there.
For Rod and Biruté, these samples provide more raw data to help understand this primate, so like us, even in his afflictions.
That's all right, Bindi. It's all right.
Torture, isn't it, Bindi?
Finally, there comes a day when the rehabilitants are taken deeper into the jungle. Familiar now with their natural environment, they've grown in confidence as they enter the last phase of their rehabilitation. In a swampy, fertile section of the rainforest, Biruté and Rod have constructed a halfway house. At this station, the rehabilitants are fed regularly while they learn to forage on their own in the surrounding jungle.
Ahmad's here just in time.
Ahmad got it. Here's the other. I'll control this one.
Okay, you look after
Listen
it.
up. Maji got it. But you can't deny an infant orangutan is milk.
Ahmad's more interested in the rice.
No, Rio.
Since there's a wild orangutan nearby, we'll be able to find out what the wild ones are eating in this area.
Yeah, right.
Do you want some more, Sugito?
Of the young ex-captive orangutans Rod and Biruté have tried to rehabilitate, 5 have already found their way to freedom and live somewhere in the forest beyond. 2 of them still return from time to time, but ultimately they too will revert completely to the wild and will come back no more.
Anwar!
Sabano. Anwar. Sabano. Sabano.
Barno!
Anwar.
Someday it will be Majid's turn, and he too will return to the forest. Since the first Western explorer arrived in the 14th century, few outsiders have ever penetrated the interior of Indonesian Borneo. Here, even the tropical dawn breaks humid and stifling. For 4 years, Biruté and Rod Galdikas Brindamour have made their home in southern Borneo's Tanjung Puting rainforest. They came here not to work with young ex-captive orangutans, but to seek out the wild ape in its own world. Over the years, they have hacked out an 80-mile network of crisscrossing trails through a forbidding jungle, alive with pythons and cobras, infested with insects and blood-sucking leeches. In the jungle's natural camouflage, often a faint sound is the only clue to the presence of the elusive orangutan. The sound of food remnants dropping to the forest floor. Biruté is attempting the first intensive long-range study of the wild orang. It appears an impossible task. The animal they track, unlike all other great apes, never seems to descend to the ground. Climbing higher into the treetops, the solitary orang makes observation difficult, sometimes impossible.
Well, so far there have been 2 fruits that dropped.
A piece of food the orangutan drops is one small clue to the life he leads. Biruté has recorded samples of more than 200 food plants and is becoming aware of individual preferences.
I imagine it is.
They calculate how far these animals range and carry on a census count.
Also,
For more than 5,000 hours, they have observed the wild orangutan.
Yeah. He's moving up.
Biruté hopes that their study will be of great value, not only in understanding the evolution of the great apes, but of man as well. For the prime objective in studying the orangutan is to learn how he has adapted to his environment. Unlike the wild orangs, the rehabilitants appear more at ease traveling on the ground. Left at the feeding station for the day, the young orangs instead invade the deserted camp. Foraging here is easier and more productive than in the forest. The orangutan, mentally equipped for a treetop life, demanding quickened reflexes, depth perception, and critical judgment, evolved a complex brain, and with it, curiosity, and the beginning of simple deductive reasoning.
Here they come.
For Biruté, the young orangs pose a unique problem.
No.
One thing she understands all too well about the rehabilitants: discipline has no effect at all. Unlike most other primates, the young orang is never disciplined by his mother in the wild. Perhaps because orangs must lead a solitary life, there is no need for social rules, no codes for group behavior.
Don't you wish you were less charming?
Problem being married to a pile of apes. I sure do.
The single overriding natural law appears to be help yourself.
This is why you're doomed to the trees.
Down. You've got to eat more quickly. Eat fast.
What do you want, Rio, huh? Now that was unfair, Sigito. Why we're letting you sit here, huh?
Though she is a scientist and the rehabilitants interrupt her work in the forest, there are times when Biruté has mixed emotions.
Mine. Not yours, mine.
She hopes that someday they will all return to the wild. Still, they will be missed. Since 1971, Biruté and Rod have continued their ceaseless search for understanding of the great Asian ape. In late 1974, they set out, determined to go beyond the kind of observation they had known till now. Always, the animal's behavior seemed affected by the observer's presence. Biruté was determined to change this.
We had decided to follow one animal, day after day, from sunrise till dark, never letting him out of our sight. Our subject was a huge male we had observed for a year and a half and had nicknamed Nick. We estimated that he was more than 20 years old and weighed at least 150 pounds. Our objective was to habituate the animal, to make our presence so natural that in time it would have no effect on his behavior. Over the years, Nick had become partially habituated. He seemed to tolerate our presence, but usually stayed up in the trees and remained a safe distance away. We were determined that he wouldn't get away, and after following him for 20 days, our efforts were rewarded. On rare occasions before, Nick had descended to the ground, but had almost always fled. Now we became the first to discover what we had only suspected from occasional sightings. The large male orangutan does almost 100% of his long-distance traveling on the ground. As we continued following Nick, we began to realize that he spends much of his day on the ground. There were occasional threats, but Nick did not flee, and we held our ground. In time, Nick began to reveal the true behavior of the wild orangutan, totally unaffected by our presence. Nick was the first wild orangutan ever to become totally habituated. We had gotten close to him by our constant following, by pressing. But on the 45th day, there came a moment I hadn't dared hope for. It began with his search for termites in a rotten log. Continuing his search for termites, he came towards us for the first time. To me, this was the moment of total acceptance, what we had worked for 3.5 long years.
In the heart of equatorial Africa lies the country of 1,000 hills, Rwanda. Her loftiest peaks, the Virunga mountain range. High in the Virungas, the fantastic shapes of an ancient rainforest burst from the rich volcanic soil. Here, one woman from California has lived for nearly a decade. A zoologist, she came here in search of the largest living primate on Earth, the mountain gorilla. Her mission was born out of the study of man and his earliest origins. Dian Fossey believes that the animal she seeks may hold clues to the way primal man lived and adapted to his environment. When the white man first came to this region, he heard tales of man-like monsters who lived on the mountain slopes. Not until the 20th century did he discover the creature Dian Fossey searches for. When she began, the mountain gorilla's natural habits were still little known. By trial and error, she learned to track them, to recognize a fresh trail, the signs of a recent nesting place. A lingering scent meant the mountain gorillas were not far ahead.
The first time I saw gorillas, I was about 150 feet away from them and across a small ravine. And they took one look at me and fled. Gorillas had only known human beings as either poachers or cattle people, and it was understandable why their immediate reaction to me was one of fear and apprehension.
She had come to this isolated rainforest hoping to witness the normal, uninhibited behavior of an animal in the wild. But the gorilla's behavior was altered and changed by the presence of a determined woman who would follow them relentlessly. Dian had no way of anticipating the inevitable, the first confrontation. A full-grown male gorilla stopped fleeing and faced his pursuer.
To make the gorilla feel more at ease, I imitated their feeding activities by making the same type of noise that they make when they obtain a leaf or a stalk. And since they've heard a sound like this all their lives, to hear it from a human couldn't help but pacify them in some ways.
Never before had they seen another creature engaged in their feeding behavior. Her ideas seemed to work. Even a threat was seen as progress. At least they were holding their ground. And she believed their threats were only bluff. Imitating their feeding was a significant breakthrough. For Dian, it was only a beginning. From the first fleeting contact, she was totally committed to somehow becoming part of the mountain gorilla's hidden world. South of the Virunga Mountains, on the shore of Lake Kivu, lies the small settlement of Gisenyi. It was from here in the fall of 1967 that Dian Fossey launched her study of the mountain gorilla. Since then, she has become a familiar figure in this Rwandan village. These people provide her only real link with the outside world. 8 or 10 times a year, she returns to resupply her mountain camp. With funds from the National Geographic Society and the Leakey Foundation, Dian buys supplies and carries on her work. From Gisenyi to the foot of the extinct volcano on which she has her camp, Dian will travel little more than 30 miles, enough to remind her that this is the most crowded and one of the poorest nations in Africa. In this small, impoverished country, the hunger for land is insatiable. Gradually, the small, marginal farms are being pushed further and further up into the mountains, threatening the natural range of the mountain gorilla. A few years ago, there was no road into these foothills, only dense stands of bamboo. Here, Dian frequently sighted gorilla groups. Now they've been pushed far up into the mountains. At the base of the Virunga Mountains, the dirt road ends at a small Bahutu settlement. Here at the 8,000-foot level, Dian must leave her van and proceed on foot. Eager for a day's pay, the villagers will carry as much as 60 pounds a person. And Dian's camp lies 2,000 feet up the steep slopes of Mount Visoki.
I decided to establish my study camp at the altitude of 10,000 feet, as far away from human encroachment as I could get it, and yet close enough to one of the mountains on which I found a substantial number of gorillas. To get to camp, we climb up on an old trail that used to be used by buffalo and elephant.
The Virunga rainforest, drenched in more than 60 inches of rain a year, is a lush haven for wildlife, an inhospitable environment for man. Dian's camp lies just 100 miles from the equator, in a setting of tropical growth chilled by the sometimes freezing mountain air. For years, this has been the world of Dian Fossey. For unknown centuries, it was the private domain of the mountain gorilla. For a full year, Dian observed little of gorilla behavior but their retreat. Although the younger animals were less fearful and more curious, they were herded away by the dominant male, the silverback, the patriarch of the family group. Dian's objective still eluded her: to infiltrate the gorilla's world and observe his behavior without altering it. There was only one approach: to stay with them day after day until finally their fear gave way to curiosity.
I had a tremendous sense of curiosity about the animals. I wanted to know all there was to be known about them, and happily I was rewarded by the same curiosity from the animals, so that my approach to them was eventually rewarded by approaches on the part of themselves toward me. Sometimes it was difficult to know who was the observer and who was the observed.
On the verge of the most promising contact, there is too often unexpected frustration. More than half of the time, Mount Visoki is shrouded in rain or mist. Regularly, fog halts the day's observations. Despite all disappointment, Dian Fossey will continue as she has from the beginning. She cannot give up. And here, there is time. In this remote forest, she has no two-way radio and little contact with the outside world. Trained in veterinary medicine and now an animal behaviorist, she once confided that even as a child, she felt less at ease with people than with animals.
I've never really felt lonely or isolated in my mountain camp, though there were times that I desperately wanted to share my experiences and thoughts with other people. And this was especially true during the days when the gorillas first started slowly to accept my presence.
When she first arrived here, Dian knew that this would be a long-range study. Now, she has no plans to leave. Dian Fossey has chosen an unconventional existence. She has given up the simple comforts most people take for granted. To her, one thing is important. In the ancient Virunga rainforest, the largest primate on Earth has lived till now an unknown life. At long last, the mountain gorilla's sanctuary stands open to one human being. Dian Fossey's entire existence is now geared to the natural routine of the mountain gorilla. To maintain contact with the group from day to day, she's on the trail long before the gorillas leave the area where they have nested for the night. For the gorillas of Mount Visoki, morning is signaled not only by the rising sun, but by the inevitable arrival of their observer. Now she is able to record individual and sometimes puzzling behavior. Augustus is the only gorilla she has ever seen clap hands. Each has his own unique behavior and personality, but all, even huge, fully grown males, are shy and gentle creatures. Her observations have disproved the myths of the gorilla's violent nature. Dian reassures the more apprehensive by imitating their behavior. He may be over 6 feet tall, weigh up to 400 pounds, but he can be frightened by the slightest move. Over the years, she has amassed a detailed file on more than 90 animals. Each is photographed, catalogued, and even nicknamed. Dian knows their personalities, their habits, and is learning how they communicate. She has identified 17 vocal sounds and can reassure the wild gorilla by imitating his primitive language. Through her unique collection of nose prints, Dian identifies each individual gorilla. The lines and swirls above their nostrils are as distinctive as a human fingerprint. For reference, each animal is named. Uncle Bert is head of the family Dian calls Group 4. One of several family groups on Mount Visoki, they were the first to accept her and now seem totally unafraid. A young adult male, Digit, is the friendliest of all. There are usually 4 adult females of differing ages in a gorilla family, and some half a dozen infants and juveniles. From Group 4's varied individuals, Dian has gleaned something about the gorillas' social structure and their life cycle. Their personalities and dispositions range from cantankerous old goat to Tiger, 4 years old, the family character. Uncle Bert, his silverback, a badge of his authority, is undisputed leader of the group in their leisurely day-long quest for food. The young learn how and what to eat by picking food remnants off the mother's body. Never has Dian seen a mother feed her youngster vegetation. Essentially a vegetarian, the mountain gorilla spends 40% of his life quietly feeding on leaves and stalks and roots. Favorite delicacies like the thistle and the barbed nettle plant pose a dilemma to the very young, whose hands and lips are not yet toughened. Over the centuries, the gorilla has evolved crushing jaws for stripping trees of bark and eating wood. Through adaptation, they have become true creatures of the forest. Its vegetation provides everything they need, not only nourishment and moisture, but shelter too. Twice daily, at night and midday, they build a nest. What they don't eat, they sleep on. One function of the nest, Dian theorizes, may be reassurance. By breaking down the foliage, they can see each other while they rest. In nests built above the dampness of the forest floor, Group 4 takes its midday nap. After their morning feeding period, they sleep and rest for 2 hours or more. All but young Tiger, who's too busy to build a nest. Between Uncle Bert, who is more than 20 years old, and Tiger, who is still a juvenile, there is a generation gap. For Tiger, every rest hour is just an opportunity to play. Augustus answers Tiger's challenge. The very young, Dian has found, spend a good 50% of every day in rough and rugged play. Uncle Bert watches every move. Tiger seems to get the message and tries to get away. But Augustus is oblivious. Uncle Bert, usually patient and tolerant, has had enough. For one brief moment, Digit, the maturing blackback, feels the lure of power and invades Uncle Bert's nest. It was this 7-year-old animal who, more than any other, has revealed the mountain gorilla's world to Dian.
One animal who was very prone to spend a great deal of time near me was Digit. And I think it is because he has no peers within his group that he was so attracted to me. He was very curious and always very anxious to come forward and investigate things like the cameras, thermoses, notebooks or gloves.
In the past, we have brought these animals into our world caged for zoos and circuses. Now, one human being has entered the world that is theirs, imitates their behavior, and hopes to be accepted. The more she lives with these gorillas, the more she realizes just how gentle they really are. In the beginning, Dian was determined that she would never touch these animals, but sometimes there is a need to communicate. Of the first time a mountain gorilla touched her, Dian wrote, "For that fleeting instant, a bridge spanning a chasm of immeasurable time linked our two species. I thought myself the most fortunate person in the world." Out of the solitude of an African rainforest, a mission that began in obscurity has given rise to an established outpost of science. In 1967, Dian Fossey came here alone. Now her work draws students and visiting scientists from around the world. Of necessity, much of Dian's time is now devoted to teaching. There is a critical period of indoctrination for a new student like Kelly Stewart. Over the months, the students will know meaningful and exciting days. With time and experience, they will be assigned to their own gorilla family groups. But nothing will equal the thrill of the first day, the first sight of a mountain gorilla in the wild. Dian passes on a legacy of understanding only she possesses. Dian realizes that she cannot carry on alone, and so she leads a handful of others into a world that till now only she has known.
Dian Fossey continued her work in the mountains of Rwanda. During the 1970s, her research institute became a world-famous center for gorilla studies. The nearby gorillas were now so accustomed to the human presence that they could be intimately observed by scientists and tourists. Dian enlightened the international community on the gentle nature of the mountain gorillas and on their desperate plight. The gorillas faced an increasing threat from poachers who destroyed many of the members of Dian's study group. Her well-publicized and sometimes bitter struggle earned her many enemies. In December 1985, Dian Fossey was murdered in her cabin on Mount Visoki, probably by poachers. The mountain gorillas of Rwanda, ready at this address.
Coming soon from National Geographic Video. Beneath its stark facade, the Savuti region of southern Africa is a land of violent extremes. Savage storms erupt without warning and set the night ablaze. Huge dust clouds loom like an inescapable shroud. This is a world ruled by the sun, the cruel, relentless force that binds predator and prey together in a desperate search for water. But now the river is disappearing. Nature has cut the Savuti's only lifeline. Now death becomes nature's constant companion, and the quest for survival the all-consuming fact of life. Join National Geographic in search of Africa's stolen river.
It's a trail left by 3 people 3.5 million years ago.
It is the greatest detective story known to man. It springs from a curiosity shared by people everywhere to understand where we came from and how we got here. Scientists the world over search for the pieces of the puzzle. And then the newest technology is focused on this most ancient of mysteries. We even study our simian cousins for clues to our own primitive past. After decades of painstaking work, a tantalizing image is emerging. Is this strange creature one of our earliest relatives? Join National Geographic on the exciting quest for the mysteries of mankind. The Soviet Union. Even in this age of glasnost, it remains a society whose foundation is one of discipline and control. The Soviet Union does have another face, but to see it, you have to come to the circus. The circus is to the average Russian what baseball is to Americans, the national pastime. It's a wondrous world where fantasy and imagination have free rein, where even a clown can be a national hero. The Soviet circus is a family tradition going back generations, but it always keeps an eye toward the future with the next generation waiting in the wings. You've got a ringside seat when National Geographic visits the Soviet circus. National Geographic Video, undeniably collectible and affordably priced, only from Vestron Video.